Hi friends, it's Mr. Alex from Adams Memorial Library, and I'm back with another Art Attack art project. As always, we're going to be creators of tales, and this week our tale is the story of a dragon. So be sure to get your Art Attack story packet, read up on that, and then we're going to create some awesome clay dragons. Let me show you what we'll need. For our dragon art project today, we're going to need just a few things. The first thing that we're going to need is our polymer clay. So we're going to need our block of that. To shape and bake our clay, we're going to need some toothpicks, a knife, and then this aluminum foil and parchment paper that should be in your kit, and that's going to help us bake the clay. Then, finally, we're going to seal off our clay with some Mod Podge and a brush in order to spread it. Now, keep in mind, if you've been using the same brushes for all of our Art Attack projects, then you're going to want to make sure that you have your brush that's specifically for glue. So let's go ahead and gather all of that up and, as always, get started. When making our clay dragon, the first thing that we're going to need to do has absolutely nothing to do with the dragon itself. We're going to make our baking tray. So in order to do that, we're going to take the sheet of tin foil and the sheet of parchment paper and lay them out like this with the parchment paper on top. Then we're going to fold in the edges just like this into a square. And what this is going to do is it's going to make our baking tray a little sturdier, but we want to make sure that we leave enough parchment paper in the center so that our dragon doesn't stick to our foil. So we'll just fold off each side, and once we're done, we should have something that looks like this. Now this should be pretty safe to bake in your oven with, and you just want to make sure that it's rigid enough that it's not floppy, but has enough space that it can also hold your clay dragon. So now that this is done, we can either set it aside if you've got something covering your table, or in my case, I'm going to use it as our surface to work on since I don't want to get any of the polymer clay on our nice tablecloth here. Now, for the clay itself, you're going to want to take it out of the packaging, but something important to note is that it does have on the side of it the instructions to bake it. So you can tear the packaging off, but either write down or take a picture of the instructions first, or just be really, really careful when you're taking the packaging off. So let's go ahead and get our block of clay out. Now that we have our clay instructions here, we're going to set those aside as well. And we have our block of clay. I'm going to recommend that you actually take your knife and cut this in half, because that should be enough clay to make a reasonably sized dragon. But if you wanted to make a second dragon, or you wanted one really big dragon, you could experiment with that as well. Just keep in mind that if you do opt to make a bigger dragon, that is going to take more time to bake later on. But we'll talk about that later. For right now, we have our block of clay, and the next step is that we want to break it into sections. So we can get our knife again, and we want 3 sections. We want a bigger section for our body and 2 smaller sections for the wings. So for mine, I'm going to start by cutting about 2 of these lines of clay for each wing, and then leave the remainder as my body. So we'll go ahead and cut that now. And then once we have these cut, we're going to shape each portion of clay into a nice little round ball. And we can just do this with our hands, and this is going to help give us an idea of roughly our dragon's proportions. So we have one wing there, one wing there, and our body here. And once we have our body into a sort of round shape, it's nice and smoothed out, we can actually go ahead and elongate it a little bit, sort of like a noodle. With our noodle, we can then take and wrap part of it around like this to form our dragon's tail, and then wrap around an additional part into a circle for the dragon's head. So we should have a shape that looks like this. Then, for our dragon's wings, we're going to take our balls, flatten them out a little bit, and shape them into a sort of crescent moon shape. Something that looks like this. And that's going to be the basis for our dragon's wings. So we'll have the other wing like this. And now, as you can see, I've aligned it roughly so that we have the basic shape of our dragon's body, tail, and wings. But we can't put our dragon into the oven like this. So I'm going to take some time to work and shape the clay the way that I want it to be. And in order to do that, there's a couple of things that we want to keep in mind. The first thing that we want to keep in mind is that we don't want any particular piece of our dragon to be terribly thicker than the others. Because if we have really thick pieces and really skinny pieces, the skinny pieces will bake really fast when we dry our clay, and the thicker pieces will take forever to bake, and we don't want that. So we want to keep our dragon at roughly an even consistency, and you can have some parts that have a little more clay than others. Obviously, it doesn't have to be completely even the whole way across, but you don't want something to be, say, twice as thick as another part of your dragon. The other thing that we want to keep in mind is that we want our pieces to be attached. Again, as you can see here, my wings, they're not really attached. They're just sort of sitting next to my dragon right now. And if I were to bake it like that, I would actually wind up with 3 different pieces, my body and my 2 wings. And we don't want that either. So we want to take our clay and we want to shape it and just sort of use our fingers to push the clay into the other pieces and make sure they're really fused together before we put it in the oven. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to take a couple of minutes to work with my clay and form it into the dragon shape that I want it to be. Alrighty, so now that I've spent a lot of time working with my clay, I have what I think is a pretty good dragon shape here. Now, some things that I did, but you certainly do not have to do, is I took and sort of pinched the center of my dragon's wings to add these points to it, which I think are pretty cool. And I also pinched at the top of my dragon's head to make these little horns. Now, again, there are many different types of dragons, and there are many different ways that you could design your dragon. So your dragon does not have to look anything like mine. The other thing to note is that you probably saw me flip my project over a couple of times. Now, what I did there was I wanted to make sure that I had sealed off and connected the bottom part of my project as well. It's really great that, as you can see, there aren't a whole lot of seams in the top of my project here, but we also want to make sure that there aren't any seams in the bottom of my project either. So I flipped it over, and I did have to reconfigure and fix a few parts of my dragon after I did that. So you might want to keep that in mind as well as you're working on your dragon. But right now, I overall have a pretty good dragon shape. Once I have my dragon shape, it's time to decorate and design a little bit, and that is where our toothpicks come in. So, for instance, with our toothpicks, I can take and maybe add some nostrils for our dragon's nose, if we'd like to do that. I can add some designs to the wings, or any other part of the body that you'd like. You don't want to go too deep into your dragon because you don't want to separate those connections and open up any seams, but it doesn't hurt to add a little bit of detail as well. So don't be afraid to give your dragon some cool designs, especially some facial features. So, just like I said, I added some wing designs as well as some nostrils and eyes for my dragon, and I think that's pretty good. It's time to bake. So what we're going to do is that we're going to get our packaging again that we had, and on the packaging it says that we should bake at 275 degrees for 15 minutes per quarter inch. So we're going to want to measure our dragon, preheat our oven, and bake this little guy or girl, depending on our dragon, and then it will be ready to go. So for this part, a couple of things to keep in mind. You definitely want to keep an eye on your dragon. It says that you should bake it per quarter inch, and you definitely want to do that, but remember that you can always check on your dragon. It's always better if you have to leave your dragon in the oven a little longer than realizing that you've left it in for too long. So definitely check on your dragon throughout the process, and also you're definitely going to want to get an adult to help you. Even if you use the oven at home normally, Your family might have certain rules about how to put things that aren't food into the oven. For instance, that's why we have this not on a baking tray. So make sure you check with an adult, have them help you set the oven properly, and make sure that you do it in a way that you're not going to cross-contaminate anything that your family might eat off of or anything like that, even though this clay overall is pretty safe to work with. So we're going to take that, we're going to preheat our oven, and when we come back, we'll have a baked dragon. While our dragon is baking, remember that you have your Collector of Tales packet, and in there is going to be a story about dragons that you can read while waiting for your dragon to bake. I'll see you soon with my finished dragon. And after completing our baking process, we now have one hardened clay dragon. Now, something that I forgot to mention earlier is whenever I said about baking it per 1/4 inch, that's each 1/4 inch that your dragon is tall, not that it is long. So you want to measure your dragon from top to bottom, from its highest point to lowest point, instead of from nose to tail. So make sure you figure that into your calculations, and you'll have a dragon that looks something like this. Once our dragon has been baked thoroughly, our next step is to apply our Mod Podge, and this is going to seal it off. Now, I will say that this is something that you don't have to do because it does have the potential to make your dragon a little bit tacky to the touch whenever you're finished. So if you would rather have it like this, you can leave it here and be finished, but I want to make sure that I seal mine off. So I'm going to go ahead and take my brush and just gently apply a nice layer of Mod Podge over my dragon. Now, keep in mind while you're doing this, a couple of things. Your dragon will dry clear, so even though it looks like it's covered in white right now, that'll be okay, that'll come out clear, but you definitely want a pretty light layer. You do not want to completely drench your dragon in Mod Podge, because if you do, then your dragon is going to come out rather sticky. So instead, we're just going to give it a nice light layer of Mod Podge, just enough to seal it off a little bit, and then we should be good. So let me go ahead and finish applying that now. And just like that, I have my dragon covered in Mod Podge, and I'm going to go ahead and let this dry. Once our Mod Podge is dry, then we will have our finished dragon, and we will have finally finished our last project and become Creator of Tales. I want to thank everybody for making these awesome clay dragons with me today, and don't forget that you can show your participation in today's art project by going onto Beanstack and entering the code word mermaid. And if you enter that code word, it'll help you earn tickets toward some of our great prizes. You can earn even more tickets by taking a picture of your project and sending it to us through our photo release form, which will help you earn your Summer Reading Shutterbug badge and, like I said, even more tickets. Finally, be sure to follow us on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and YouTube to get updates not only about future art projects here at the library, but also everything else that we'll be doing. And as always, happy crafting!